When people talk about the most terrifying serial killer in America, what comes to mind? Maybe a Ted Bundy, maybe a Jeffrey Dahmer. But what if I told you that way before them, there was a guy whose crimes were so disgusting and terrifying that even the most seasoned detective couldn't figure out what the heck was going on? Yes, his name was Albert Fish. Hi, hello everyone. I'm Paula Taz, and this is Crumb Thread, where every case has a thread worth following. Look, this case has my jaw on the floor. I mean, a little girl goes missing, and for 6 long years, we have no idea what happened to her until the killer decides to send a letter to the girl's mom to describe all the horrific things that he did to her. Yeah, and this bozo probably wouldn't have never gotten caught if he didn't send in that letter. Like BTK. Actually, he just outed himself. So, settle in. Let's grab a drink. Today it's Canada Dry. Let's crack it too, because it's a long day. Settle in and let's follow the thread. But before we begin, I want to give a quick warning, a quick content warning. This case does involve violence against children, abuse, cannibalism, and other disturbing subject matter. While I won't be showing any graphic details or explicit content, some of the topics discussed may still be difficult to hear. So, viewer discretion is advised. So let's start at the beginning. Albert Fish was born Hamilton Fish on May 19, 1870. Yeah, this case goes way back. Way back. His father was 75 years old when he had Hamilton. So let's put two and two together. He pretty much wasn't going to be around long enough. And so at the age of 5, well, Albert was 5, Hamilton's dad passed away. This loss was really hard on his mom, so much so that she just couldn't take care of him anymore. She sent him to St. John's Orphanage in Washington, D.C. And at the time, these orphanages did not have a really good reputation. I mean, a lot of the times these kids were sexually abused, mutilated, and sometimes even just murdered. And nothing was really done because there was no regulations to these places. It was a very unsafe place for kids back in the 1800s. At this orphanage, he was made fun of for his name. They called him like eggs and ham. So Hamilton Ham. So he changed his name to Albert Fish, which was his dead brother's name. Now, I don't know if it was like in honor of his brother or if it was like, let me just borrow this real quick. But I don't know. So for now, I'll refer to him as Albert Fish or Albert. At this orphanage, the nuns would mistreat the children a lot. Like, he would be beaten in front of all these kids. And it wasn't just like a little smack around here or there. No, this was like, he was made to stand in front of all of the other children in the orphanage, and he was butt naked. They would whip him naked. And I feel like when you experience something like this, especially at that age, I think something inside of you just kind of like flips, if you know what I mean. And I think a lot of serial killers do go through this thing called trauma at an early age that make them do certain things in their future. Yeah, that's just how the cookie crumbles. And Albert started having this defense mechanism to this pain. So he would turn this pain into pleasure. He liked it. He loved it. And he even climaxed to it a lot of the times. Albert began to beat other kids, and he would even self-harm. Like, he would burn himself with ropes and stick needles into himself. Yeah. And at some point, Albert's mom came back to pick him up from the orphanage and bring him back home. She got a good government job that could support both of them. But Albert at this time was 10 years old, and the damage was already done. His mentality was different than that of the 5-year-old little boy that got dropped off years ago. All the signs of a serial killer were there. I mean, he was self-harming still, and at the age of 11, he was wetting the bed. Another weird thing, he made a new friend in the neighborhood, and as often as best friends do, right? They start doing friendship things. And what I mean by that is his friend and Albert, his friend himself, he and his friend would go and drink each other's pee and poo for fun. That's a little odd. I'd never do that, but I'm also not a serial killer, so maybe that's just a thing. Okay, so eating and drinking each other's poo, right? He also spent his weekends at the local pool where he would like to watch the boys dress and undress themselves. And if that really didn't do it for him, he would go to public bathhouses to watch kids dress and undress. And I understand exploring sexuality, cool, but he didn't even go just for that. He would go because he said that he really liked the sounds of the boys going in and out of the water, like the sounds of the water splashing and the smells of the water and the kids, which is kind of weird. It's a bit concerning, not just weird. In those early years, he was also writing to women in the papers. See, back in the 1800s, the women used to have to write in the papers for like marriage proposals. So think of it as like your modern day Bumble. Women would really want like marriage, and so they would write to the paper, I'm 18, I did this, I did that, I know how to cook. And so that was put out on the paper so somebody could reply. And Albert would go off and reply to these ads, and he would respond back with like aggressively sexual letters, kind of like your modern day unsolicited dick pic, you know? Like, ew. He's in his teens now and needs a job, so he goes to the bathhouses and starts sex work. And I want to remind you of his age. He's 12. And he pretty much does sex work all the way until he's the age of 20. At this point, he's moved to New York and is doing sex work full time. It's 1894. And he's hanging out with this friend. And we don't really know if it was truly a friend, just because his friend would hang out a lot on the docks. And the docks was like the local place to like find Johns, which were male sex workers. So Albert and this friend were hanging out, chilling by the docks. And in walks this captain, John Davis. And he started telling him a story about the captain's boat was on a route to China during the 1876 through 1879 Chinese famine. And at that point, there was no meat. There was not a lot of food. And so what people ended up doing was selling their children for survival, for food, for meat. And oftentimes, people would just turn to cannibalism and they would eat kids under the age of 12. But yeah, that's truly history if you want to go look that up. Well, anyways, Albert started deeply thinking about this concept of eating humans. He started reading books about it. He started reading books on serial killers. And oftentimes he would be carrying that sort of material in his pocket, just chilling. His mom thought his behavior was really weird. So she was like, light bulb, let's get you married. She arranged for him, Albert, to get married to this woman, an 18-year-old Anne Marion Hoffman. And they were able to have 6 children together. At this time, he was 28 years old, so there was a big age gap, but I guess that was normal back in the day. Albert would sometimes ask the children to participate in these sadomasochistic games and other odd, weird games. For example, he would sit on his back on all fours, kind of like you're pretending to be like a dog, and he's only wearing trousers. And he has his kids sit on his back, and they would play this game where he would ask them to ask him to guess a number. And if he guessed the wrong number, then they would paddle him that many times in the butt. This paddle was not a normal paddle. The paddle had nails sticking out of it with the sharp pieces or the sharp bits at the end of the wider paddle. I'll put a picture up, and then obviously with a handle. And they would go until blood was running down his legs. I think that's really traumatizing for kids. By this time, he was developing a skill for painting houses and often worked in the states across the country. He said that he started targeting young Black boys. Some of them were poor, some of them were mentally challenged. He said that he would go for these boys because the police wouldn't really look for them. And sadly, that was true. He also targeted the physically disabled. Some pure evil must have got into him because this is a really sad story. So rape wasn't enough for Albert. He wanted to torture and kill. Basically, he wanted to do sexual sadism. And his first victim was in 1910 with a disabled man named Thomas Keaton. Research does not show how he got Thomas Keaton to get into this farmhouse, but he did. Albert tortured Thomas for 2 weeks. Sorry, hydration break. Albert said he shall never forget the screams or the look he gave me. After 2 weeks, Albert ends up cutting off half of Thomas's penis. See, Albert wanted to eat the penis, right? But he couldn't because it was raining outside and it got really humid. And remember, back in the day, they didn't have fridges. So he was like, well, it's going to spoil. I can't do anything about it. So Thomas is like bleeding out. Albert just looks at him and is like, okay, well, let me clean you up with peroxide. He wraps like a dirty towel on him and he slapped a $10 bill on the table and was like, see ya. To this day, we don't know what happened to Thomas Keaton. If he died there, bled out, or if he survived, we just don't know. Oh, and he did this all while he was married. I don't know when he found the time. I'm sure she saw some weird signs. His marriage only lasted 19 years. And she said, it's you, not me, babe. Like, literally. And she took all the furniture and left. For a minute, I was like, yes, girl, get it. But then she left her kids with him, so I think that's pretty shitty. That's just my opinion. He was going through it, man. He started sticking needles in his testicles. And it wasn't just like a little boop. Like, no, he was sticking them in his groin area. He was also taking these cotton rags and drenching them in alcohol. And he would stick them up his butt and light them on fire so he can feel the pain. He was feeding his children raw meat. And I mean, he was eating the raw meat too, but he was like feeding it to them so they could all experience this meal, right? And he was experiencing also some religious delusions. One summer, he was on top of a hill and he got full naked and ran up the hill and was like, I am Christ. Yeah, poor kids really had to see their dad go through all that. Surprisingly, he was not a stranger to the law either. He was arrested in 1903 for grand larceny and the embezzlement of funds. He also had a minor record for petty theft and those obscene letters. I'm not sure if the authorities had any sort of inkling about him torturing these children because he said he was very much doing that all throughout his life. He had these instruments of hell that included a paddle, a meat cleaver, and knives that he would use on the children for torture. He was, again, having religious delusions, and he kept saying that Apostle John was telling him to torture and kill these children in the name of the Lord. I'm not sure if that makes any sense, because that doesn't make any sense to me, but he full-on thought that this was what he needed to do. In 1924, Albert is now 55 years old. He's considered like grandpa age, even though it's not, and he played this persona up really well. He had this kind, soft-spoken voice, a wrinkly, hopeless face, and eyes that the deepest of blues could ever hold. It gave so much warmth and welcoming vibes. He was not any of those things. Like, kids, please run away. Run away. In July of 1924, 8-year-old Francis McDonald played on the front porch of his home in the pastoral Carlton Woods section of Staten Island. His mom was sitting on the front porch. She was nursing her newborn daughter, and she saw this gray old man off in the distance. She describes him as a fragile, elderly man with a droopy gray mustache. And he was just muttering stuff to himself. He left, and she thought nothing of it. Later, he was seen again while the other 4 boys were playing. Albert called Francis McDonald over. Francis's friends noticed a boy that looked just like Francis walking into the woods with an elderly man right behind him. His family did not notice that he was missing until it was dinner time. And Francis's dad was a police officer, so he gathered everyone in the community to go and look by those woods. Francis was found naked, strangled under a tree. He was strangled by his suspenders. Francis was sexually assaulted and mutilated. The back of his hamstring was missing. It was removed. What did Albert do with this hamstring, you may ask? He ate it on some Hannibal Lecter shit. He was never caught for this. And he gained a new nickname, the Gray Man. You'll start to notice he racks up these nicknames like it's candy. Like, can you imagine? Not the Gray Man. The next major killing was in February of 1927. A 4-year-old little boy named Billy Gaffney was last seen playing with another neighbor down the hallway of his apartment building. After a while, no one sees the little boys playing anymore. And so they go and search for the boys, and they were able to find only one of them. And he was found on top of the roof of the building. The boy looked so shook, like he didn't know what happened. And they asked him, like, hey, where did little Billy go? And he said the boogeyman kidnapped him. Like, excuse me? So the whole neighborhood starts to come together to look for Billy. A trolley conductor comes forward to say that an old man was sitting next to this little boy on the trolley, and the little boy was calling and crying for his mama. The whole ride, the old man was trying to shush the little boy. But that was the only clue the police ever got. They could not find Billy. They didn't have a body to go off of, and I feel like it's very hard for detectives to do an investigation without a body. Later on, we learn what happened because Albert tells police what he did. Albert describes what happened to Billy, and the police say, quote, he said it in a peculiar mixture. He spoke in a matter-of-fact way, like a housewife describing her perfect methods of cooking. But at times, his voice and facial expression indicated a kind of satisfaction and ecstatic thrill. These are some sick things that he does, so please, warning. The reason Billy's body was never found was because Albert cut it up and ate it. Albert took Billy to Rikers Avenue dumps. There was a house on the property, and Albert stripped Billy naked, and he tied his hands and feet together and gagged him with using a rag from the dump. He took his dirty clothes and his shoes and lit them on fire, and he threw them into the dump. He leaves home and leaves little Billy in this house by himself at the dump. How no one found Miss Little Billy really surprises me, but I guess the dump wasn't a really popular place. And Albert comes back the next day at 2 p.m. with his instruments of hell. Albert made a Cat O' Nine tail, which was a leather grip with a firm handle and 9 smaller whips at the end. He made one with 6 instead of 9. He then whipped little Billy's butt until blood ran down his legs. Albert cut his ears and his nose off and slit his mouth like a Joker smile from ear to ear. And then Albert gouged Billy's eyes out. It makes me so sad because Albert literally says that it wasn't until then that Billy passed away. So he endured all that pain and then he passed. Like, what a demon. And you would think he was done. No. He takes the nose, ears, cuts parts of Billy's face and his butt cheeks, his penis, his balls, and takes them all home to cook. Albert puts the rest of Billy's body in potato sacks and he fills them up with rocks. And he drops those in the pool of slimy water that's on the road to North Beach. North Beach is just a few miles east on Long Island. I'm just going to pull a little picture up there. He takes his meat home, and Albert calls it his meat, like very territorial. And he cooks it. And he says, quote, I had the front of his body I liked best. His monkey and his peewees and a nice little fat behind to roast in the oven and eat. I made a stew out of his ears, nose, pieces of his face and belly. I put onions, carrots, turnips, celery, salt, and pepper. It was good. I put strips of bacon on each cheek of his behind and put them in the oven. Then I picked 4 onions, and when the meat had roasted about a quarter of an hour, I poured about a pint of water over it for gravy and put in the onions. At frequent intervals, I basted his behind with a wooden spoon so the meat would be nice and juicy. I never ate any roast turkey that tasted half as good as his sweet fat little behind did. I ate every bit of meat in about 4 days. Albert was never a suspect until he confessed years later. And the newspapers gave him a new name, the Boogeyman. Like, ooh, the Boogeyman. All right, so let's go forward a couple years. It's 1928, and Albert is 60 years old at this time. He's been kind of playing up this old man persona, and he's getting really good at it. He has his eye set on this kid named Edward Budd. Albert was going by the name Frank Howard. Not legally, he was just borrowing it. Maybe because it made him sound more grandpa-y, but whatever. So he puts an ad out on the paper, and he says he's a farmer from Long Island and needs help on the farm. He's offering a job in a town called Farmingdale. In the ad, he offered room and board and $15 a week, which was a very good offer. And Albert saw the ad and responded to it. But it was a trap. Albert, aka Frank Howard, responded, "You're hired. I can come pick you up tomorrow." Albert's house is in the meatpacking district in Manhattan. People were not well off in that area. So this job brought a new sense of hope to Edward and his family for a better future. So June 2nd, Frank, aka Albert, did not show up as he said he would, and he wrote to the family that he was a little bit delayed, but that he was coming the next day. At 11 a.m. the next day, he showed up to the Buds apartment bringing gifts of strawberries and fresh cream pot cheese. He said, "These products are straight from my farm." The family had lunch with him. Edward's dad, who's also named Albert, coincidentally, said that he looked credible and genteel. The family was charmed. And in walks Grace Budd. She's singing a little tune as she walks past Albert. She's 10 at the time. Albert cannot take his eyes off of her. And his plans changed. I can just imagine like a Grinch face, like when he has an idea and his like lips curl and it's like, you know what I'm saying? Well, and if you don't, I'll put a picture up. Hydration break. He told the family that he would be back to pick up Edward in the afternoon, but first, he had to go to his niece's birthday party. And he asked Grace if she'd like to go. Side note, Grace told Albert that she didn't really have many friends. Grace was suffering from anemia, which left her really weak and frail. She was also very shy and quiet, and it seems like she was just really lonely. Grace's mom didn't know if it was a good idea to let her go, but her dad completely said, just let her go. She agreed and helped her daughter into a gray coat. They watched Grace and Frank, aka Albert, walk hand in hand down the street. And sadly, this was the last time that the family or anyone saw Grace alive. The evening rolls by and there is no sign of Frank and Grace. The next morning, young Edward runs to the police station to report his sister's disappearance. The police lieutenant told the Buds that the address that Frank Howard had provided for them was fictitious. The old man was a fraud, and that there was no Frank Howard, no farm in Farmingdale. None of it was true. The case gets a ton of attention in the newspapers. I mean, everybody wants to know, and everybody is talking about it. Like, a kidnapping? The police had so little evidence to go off of. All they had was a fingerprint, a telegram he sent, and eyewitnesses. They don't have a solid lead or a body. And again, it's difficult to solve anything without a body. There's no DNA technology back in the day. It's hard. It's just really hard. The lead detective was named William F. King, and he was interviewing all the pedophiles and offenders in the city. The case was going cold after 2 years, but then a lead pops up. A woman turned in her 66-year-old husband named Charles Pope. He was institutionalized in the past, and that was just enough for the police to be like, yep, this is our guy. This is our guy. But the story was just not fitting together. They asked Grace's mom to look at Charles Pope and to figure out if that was the guy that she remembered. And she was like, yeah, I guess that could be the guy. I mean, sure, that's the guy. They did a writing sample on Charles Pope, and it didn't match the handwritten letter that Frank sent them. So then they tested his fingerprints, and that too was not a match. But they arrested him anyway. The case goes all the way to trial. He was in jail for about 3 months, and they found him not guilty. Turns out his wife was just being a little revengeful, and she turned in her own husband. I mean, girl, what did he do to you that made you go that far? Please spill the tea. Time is passing, and Albert gets arrested again for writing obscene letters in the mail. Because of these letters, he was committed to a hospital. Albert was put in observation at New York's psychiatric hospital called Bellevue. They said that he can tell right from wrong, but that he was very sexually sadistic. And they let him go. That's it. They just let him run free. 6 years go by without Grace, but Albert must have gotten bored or something and decides to write Grace's mom a letter. The handwritten letter details all the gruesome things he did to Grace. The writing matched the telegram from back in the day. The letter started off with a background from the Chinese famine and the steamboat captain he met. You guys remember. A little background story. And that's how he started off liking flesh, apparently. Then he confesses to killing the 2 little boys and Grace. Here's just a little part of the letter. On Sunday, June the 3rd, 1928, I called on you at 406 West 15th Street. Brought you pot cheese and strawberries. We had lunch. Grace sat in my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her. On the pretenses of taking her to a party, you said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester I had already picked out. When we got there, I told her to remain outside. She picked wildflowers. I went upstairs and stripped all my clothes off. I knew if I did not, I would get her blood on them. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in the closet until she was in the room. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run down the stairs. I grabbed her and she said she would tell her mama. First, I stripped her naked. Oh, how she did kick, bite, and scratch. I choked her to death, then cut her in small pieces so I could take my meat to my rooms, cook and eat it. How sweet and tender her little ass was roasted in the oven. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body. I did not f her, though. I could have, had I wished. She died a virgin. Like, what the heck? Like, that's a no. The handwriting matched the one from Frank Howard. The envelope to use was also traceable. It had a logo on it. The detectives traced the logo to a specific location, and it was the New York's Private Sheriff's Benevolent Association. The detectives were able to collect writing samples from all the members, but not one of them matched. A janitor came forward to say that a while back, he stole some envelopes, but that he did not have them anymore because he left them at his old apartment. And round of applause to him, because I would have been a little scared to come forward that I stole something from an association. I can imagine the bravery that it took and the courage it took for him to come forward. The police go to the apartment, and the landlady was shocked when the police share Frank Howard's description. That was the guy living in the apartment for the past 2 months. His name is Albert Fish, and he had checked out just a few days ago, but he had asked her if she could hang on to a couple letters that he was getting from his brother, and that he would be back to correct them. What a moment. I wish I was there. I wish I was a fly on the wall to see it. On December 13, 1934, the landlady called Detective King. Albert Fish was at the rooming house looking for his letters. The old man was sitting with a teacup when King opened the door. Fish stood up and nodded when King asked him if he was Albert Fish. Suddenly, Fish reached into his pocket and took out a razor blade, which he held in front of him. Infuriated, King grabbed the old man's wrist and twisted it behind his back and said, "I got you now." So triumphantly. It seemed like Albert was really ready to get caught because he was just spilling everything he did. He said he killed in every state and had killed at least 100 children. I mean, who knows how true that is, just because he only really talked about 3 in detail. He took investigators to the spot where he had Grace Budd. He took them to a cabin where there was a skull and bones. It was enough bones to make a skeleton, and it was that of a 10-year-old girl. Dental records did match that of Grace Budd. Pre-trial, he met up with a psychiatrist and told him that he molested over 400 kids, maimed about 100, and murdered at least 15 over the 20 years. Albert Fish was on trial for the murder of Grace Budd, and it was the only murder that he was ever convicted for. It started on March 11th, 1935, in White Plains, New York, which was where Grace had been murdered. It was a big media and public event. I mean, everyone wanted to see the ending of this monster who was called the Boogeyman, the Gray Man, the Werewolf of Wisteria, the Brooklyn Vampire, and the Moon Maniac. You remember that one? Oh, Christ. The nicknames were just endless. The defense argued that he was insane, pointing to his lifelong history of abnormal behavior, his obsession with pain, and his confessions of hearing voices and commanding him to kill. They even put up an x-ray of about 29 exactly, needles that were in his groin area. And they weren't just like sticking out, they were in there. And he was like walking with this pain that he was so obsessed with. However, the prosecutors emphasized the deliberate planning of Grace Budd's abduction and murder, portraying him as sane but very evil. Everyone in the courtroom was in awe of how calm, frail, and gentle this man looked. Like, how can this grandpa of a man do all these awful, nasty things? He looked void of remorse. So the jury took less than an hour and found him guilty of the premeditated crime in the interest of sexual gratification. They agreed he was 100% off. but he was still sentenced to death by electric chair. And just like Albert is who he is, Albert was excited to die. He said that it was the last thing he wanted to experience in his whole life, death itself. He does love pain, and he said it would be a supreme thrill, as if he was like going to go jump off a plane or something like that. Albert asked if he was going to be conscious in the moment of his death, and they said yes. And he was like, yeah, like, hurrah, fist bump. He was sent to die on the electric chair on January 16th, 1936 at Sing Sing prison. And this is just a small part of Albert's vicious story. But what are your thoughts? Do you feel like he should have been put in a psychiatric hospital for the rest of his life? Like forever, never, never? Or was the electric chair just exactly what he needed? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And like and subscribe to keep up to date to the latest episode of Crime Thread. Stay safe, and I'll see you on the next one. And cheers to catching the bad guys.